Hello, welcome to the course PH5 BO6 Electrodynamics 2. The contents of this course is taken from Introduction to Electrodynamics by David J. Griffiths. We will continue to discuss topics from Chapter 9 Electromagnetic Waves. In the last class we have seen what's the energy flow in an electromagnetic wave. Today let's derive specific expressions for energy and momentum transported by monochromatic plane waves. So if you remember the geometry, if the wave is traveling along the plus z direction, and you can assume that the electric fields and magnetic fields are oscillating perpendicular to the z-axis, which is along the xy plane. So if the electric field is along the x direction, and consequently the magnetic field is along the y direction. And the amplitudes of electric and magnetic fields are related by the equation B naught equal to 1 over C E naught. Now the energy density or energy per unit volume stored in the electromagnetic field, we are already familiar with this expression. Energy density U equal to half epsilon naught E square plus 1 over 2 mu naught B square. B square I can write as 1 over C square E square, and 1 over C square is mu naught epsilon naught. So B square equal to mu naught epsilon naught E square. So substitute for B square in this expression. So mu naught cancel, and you have half epsilon naught E square plus half epsilon naught E square, which is epsilon naught E square. Now you can expand the electric field E in terms of the cosine function. This becomes the energy density U equal to epsilon naught E naught square cos square kz minus omega t plus delta. So if you notice, the contribution of the electric field and the contribution of magnetic field both are equal towards the energy density. Both contribute half epsilon naught E square. Coming to the Poynting vector, which gives the energy flux density or energy per unit area per unit time transported by the field. This is 1 over mu naught E cross B. Since electric field and magnetic fields are perpendicular to each other, the cross product is same as a normal product. So this gives you 1 over mu naught, and B naught you can write in terms of 1 over C E naught. So this gives you 1 over C mu naught E naught square cos square kz minus omega t plus delta, and the direction of the energy flow is along the z direction. Now this constant factor 1 over C mu naught, what you do is you divide and multiply with C on both numerator and denominator. So this becomes C over C square mu naught. 1 over C square is mu naught epsilon naught. Mu naught get cancelled. This becomes C epsilon naught. So instead of 1 over C mu naught, you can write C epsilon naught. So the expression for the flux density becomes C epsilon naught E naught square cos square kz minus omega t plus delta z cap. Now this term epsilon naught E naught square cos square, the phase factor, this is the energy density. So you can write the Poynting vector S equal to velocity C multiplied by the energy density U. And if you look at the geometry, this expression is quite obvious. Suppose you have a wave traveling towards the right with velocity C. Assume that you have a cylindrical medium of cross-sectional area A. So when wave travels with velocity C in time delta t, it's going to cover a distance C into delta t. So the total volume of this space is area A multiplied by length C into delta t, AC delta t. So if small u is the energy density of the wave, then the total energy is given by energy density multiplied by the corresponding volume. So UAC delta T gives you the total energy. So energy per unit time per unit area. You have to divide this with area and time. So A delta T both cancel. You are left with U multiplied by C. So this is the flux density. Finally, one thing we haven't discussed so far, the electromagnetic wave not only carries energy, it carries momentum as well. So the momentum density stored in the fields is given by G equal to 1 over C square into Poynting vector S. So we are not going into the details of this derivation. If any of you is interested, you can refer to chapter number 8 from Griffiths. Okay. So expand S, you get 1 over C epsilon naught E naught square cos square kz minus omega t plus delta into z cap, or in terms of energy density, S is C multiplied by U. So divide with C square, you get 1 over C U into Z cap. So these are the instantaneous values of energy density, flux density and momentum density. Remember one thing, we are talking about electromagnetic radiation. Specifically, if you look at the visible spectrum, the wavelength is so short, it ranges from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometer. So if you take the mean value, it's around 550 nanometer, 5.5 into 10 to the power minus 7 meter. And the frequency ranges from 4 to 7 into 10 to the power 14 hertz. So correspondingly, the time period is 1 over frequency. It's of the order of 10 to the power minus 50. So the time period is very, very short. So suppose you want to make a measurement of energy density or momentum density. So even if your measurement takes 1 second, within that 1 second, so many wave cycles are going to get completed because the duration of one complete cycle is so short. So in other words, when you make a measurement, you are going to make a measurement over a large number of cycles. In other words, what you are measuring is the average value of the function and not the instantaneous value. So even though it's nice to define the instantaneous values of energy density, momentum density, etc., practically it makes more sense to define the average values of these parameters. So let's try to derive the average values of energy density, flux density and momentum density. And if you look at any of these expressions, we have some constants. So the average values of these constants remain the same. Then you have a cosines for the function. So when I talk about the average value of any of these energy parameters, essentially I need to find out the average value of cos square function. Now there are two ways you can find the average value of cos square or sine square for that matter. One is a qualitative way, which is an easy way, or a more quantitative way. We will define what is the average value of a function, and from that definition we will derive the final value of it. Okay. So let's first do the easy method, the qualitative method. So look at the sine function. So sine 0 is 0 and one complete cycle is from 0 to 2 pi, and sine 2 pi is also 0. So it starts from 0 amplitude and ends at 0 amplitude. It has two half cycles, one positive half cycle and one negative half cycle. Or in terms of the area enclosed by this graph, I have half amount of positive area and half amount of negative area. Looking at the cosine function, it starts from cos 0 equal to 1, finally ends at cos 2 pi equal to 1. So I have half amount of negative area. Similarly, I have quarter positive area here, quarter positive area here, which together makes half positive area. So just like the sine function, I have half amount of positive area, half amount of negative area. Now if you take square of these two functions, so let's take the sine square x. So sine square x is going to look something like this. If you take cos square x, it's also going to look exactly the same. So if you compare these two half cycle, previously I had half positive area, half negative area. Now I have both positive areas. Same way for cosine square x also I have both positive areas here. And we also know the trigonometric relation sine square theta plus cos square theta equal to 1. And from the graph we know that the contribution of sine square and the contribution of cos square both are exactly the same. So from these two we can easily make out that each of this contribute exactly half. So average value of sine square theta, so this bracket represent average value, is same as average value of cos square theta, which is equal to 1. So let's do a more rigorous mathematical approach. Mathematically, average value of a function is defined as 1 over the time period integral 0 to t, the corresponding function. So average value of cos square theta I can write as 1 over t integral 0 to t cos square theta d theta. Cos square theta you can expand as 1 plus cos 2 theta divided by 2. When you perform the integration, this is going to be theta plus sine 2 theta by 2, and limits are from 0 to t. Apply the limit, it becomes 1 over 2t, t plus sine 2t by 2. And for a sine wave or a cosine wave, time period is from 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so substitute for t here. So this becomes 1 over 4 pi, 2 pi plus sine 2 pi by 2. So when you simplify this, you get half. Same way you can do as an assignment, find out the average value of sine square theta. So once you know the average value of cos square function, you can easily define the average values of the energy parameter. Energy density is epsilon naught E naught square cos square kz minus omega t plus delta. When you take the average value of this given by the bracket symbol, the cos square term is going to contribute half. Other terms are constants, they remain the same, so you get half epsilon naught E naught square. Flux density is C epsilon naught E naught square cos square kz minus omega t plus delta z cap. The average value, once again, the cos square term contributes half, so it becomes half C epsilon naught E naught square z cap. Similarly, the average value of moment density is 1 over 2C epsilon naught E naught square z cap. So remember, when you make a measurement, what you are going to measure is the average values and not the instantaneous values. Now, this particular expression, the average value of the Poynting vector, this is an average energy per unit time per unit area. As I mentioned in the previous class, there is a more popular name to it. This is known as intensity. So whenever we talk about energy, there are three important parameters associated with energy. One is power, one is flux, and other one is intensity. So let's see what are the definitions of this. Power is energy per unit time. So the unit is joule per second or watt. Flux is energy per area. Unit is energy per meter square. And energy per unit time per unit area. This is intensity. The unit is joule per second per meter square. Energy per time is power, so you can define intensity as power per area, so watt per meter square. Or alternatively, energy per area is flux, so you can also define intensity as flux per unit time. So as I said, an electromagnetic wave not only carries energy but momentum as well, which means when the wave travels through a medium, it's going to exchange momentum with the material. So if you take the previous geometry, you have a cylindrical material of cross-sectional area A. Light with velocity c is going to travel through this medium in time delta t. It covers a distance c delta t. So if the momentum density, the average value of the momentum density is g, then the total momentum transferred between the wave and the medium is momentum density multiplied by the corresponding wave volume AC delta T. So if this is the momentum transfer, you can define the radiation pressure as, radiation pressure is nothing but average force per unit area exerted by the electromagnetic wave on the medium. So radiation pressure is 1 over A delta P by delta T. Let's quickly check whether this definition is correct. From Newton's law, we know that rate of change of momentum is force. Force per area is the moment, the pressure. So this definition is correct. Substitute for delta P as G AC delta T divided by A delta T. So A delta T cancel, you get average value of momentum density multiplied by C. And average value of momentum density is 1 over 2c epsilon naught E naught square. C cancels, so you have half epsilon naught E naught square. Or in terms of intensity, you can write it as intensity I divided by C. So this is for a perfect absorber. In the case of a perfect reflector, what happens is the wave, instead of getting absorbed, it's going to travel in the opposite direction. So you have to count the wave twice. So consequently, the radiation pressure is 2I divided by C. And let's try to understand electromagnetically what is the origin of radiation pressure. So when an electromagnetic wave travels through a medium, both the fields, the electric field as well as the magnetic field, are going to interact with the medium. The electric field drives the charges on the surface of the medium in the x direction, and the magnetic field exerts a force Q into V cross B on them in the z direction. So you have two types of forces acting on the charges, and the net force on all the charges on the surface produces the radiation pressure. Now if you look at our daily activities, we all are exposed to sunlight all the time, or at least during the daytime we are exposed to sunlight, and sunlight is an electromagnetic radiation, which means we are always under radiation pressure by the sun. But in our daily life, we don't experience this radiation pressure, or we don't experience a force from the sun explicitly. What's the reason? If you look at the definition, you are dividing intensity with the speed of light. The speed of light is a very, very huge parameter, t into 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. So consequently, the value of radiation pressure is very small. So even though radiation pressure exists, its magnitude is so small that we are not able to experience it. Or in other words, in our daily life, we experience much stronger forces like gravitational force, which completely mask the effect of a weak force like radiation pressure. But there are situations where radiation pressure becomes significant. For example, take the case of outer space. As you know, in outer space, the gravitational force is very weak, and other types of forces like Coulombic force or van der Waals force, etc., are absent there. So in such cases, radiation pressure becomes a dominant force. I will give you one example just to highlight the importance of radiation pressure in outer space. There was a space mission by NASA which was conducted in the year 1975. This is known as the Viking program. And the aim of this program is to land on the surface of Mars. Now Mars is so many thousands of kilometers away from Sun. So before launching a spaceship, you need to get an idea about the trajectory of the spaceship. So you make a mathematical calculation about the trajectory. What do? You take into account various forces that are going to act on the spaceship, then you derive the equation of motion, solve it, then you get the trajectory as a function of time. So once you get the trajectory, you can predict if you launch the spaceship with this much initial velocity at this particular angle on the surface of Earth, after these many days it's going to arrive at this particular location on the orbit of Mars. So you can predict the trajectory correctly. So the most important part in this calculation is the determination of various forces that are going to act on the spaceship. Now by mistake, if you forgot to include the effect of sun's radiation pressure on the spaceship, then you would have missed the Mars orbit by 15,000 kilometers. In other words, the Viking 1 and 2 would not have landed on the surface of Mars. The mission would have been a failure. So I hope this example gives you an idea about what is the importance of radiation pressure. Once again, even though it exists on the surface of Earth, its magnitude is very weak that you don't feel its effects on our daily life. But in situations like outer space exploration, this becomes a very determining factor. So that's for today. In next class, we will derive the electromagnetic wave equation in the case of materials. Thank you.